I was standing in my front yard in Minneapolis, Minnesota, surveying what I considered to be an absolute masterpiece of winter engineering, when I noticed Brenda Sinclair marching across the street, with her phone pressed against her ear and fury written all over her face. The snow fort I had spent the entire weekend building with my 8-year-old son Tyler was magnificent. We had used every bit of the 2 feet of fresh powder that had dumped on our neighborhood, creating towers, walls, battlements, and even a working drawbridge made from a plastic sled and some rope. The main tower stood about 7 feet tall, which I will admit was ambitious, but Tyler's face when we finished it made every frozen finger worth it. Marcus O'Brien," Brenda called out as she stomped through the snow toward my property line. Her blonde bob was perfectly styled despite the cold, and she wore one of those expensive puffy coats that screamed suburban soccer mom with too much time on her hands. "We need to talk about this monstrosity immediately." I glanced at Tyler, who was inside the fort making battle sounds, completely oblivious to the incoming storm that had nothing to do with the weather. "Morning, Brenda. Beautiful day, isn't it? Don't you morning me," she snapped, lowering her phone but keeping it ready like a weapon. "Do you have any idea how many HOA bylaws you're violating right now?" I crossed my arms and tried to keep my expression neutral. Brenda had been the president of our Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association for 3 years, and in that time, she had made it her personal mission to ensure that every single household lived in absolute terror of stepping one toe out of line. "It's a snow fort, Brenda. Kids build them all the time." "Not 7-foot-tall ones they don't," she retorted, her voice rising an octave. Section 12. Paragraph 4 of the HOA guidelines clearly states that no temporary structures shall exceed 5 feet in height without prior written approval from the board. "It's snow," I said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "It'll melt in a week, maybe 2. That's not the point." Brenda pulled out her phone and started scrolling through something, her manicured nails tapping against the screen. "Temporary structures include but are not limited to tents, inflatable decorations, storage sheds, and any architectural addition to the property that alters its visual appearance from the street." Tyler poked his head out from the fort's entrance, his cheeks red from the cold and his eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, can we make another tower on this side?" "Maybe later, buddy," I said, keeping my attention on Brenda. "Listen, I'm not taking it down. My kid is having the time of his life, and I'm not about to destroy something we worked on together because of some ridiculous rule that was probably written to keep people from putting up tacky lawn ornaments." Brenda's face turned a shade of red that rivaled Tyler's wind-burned cheeks. "Ridiculous. Those rules maintain our property values, Marcus. They keep this neighborhood from turning into some trashy eyesore where people do whatever they want." "It's a snow fort," I repeated, my patience starting to wear thin. "Made by a dad and his kid. If you have a problem with that, I genuinely feel sorry for you." "Fine," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously calm level. "If you won't be reasonable, I'll have to take appropriate action." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, which sat directly across from mine in all its beige, boring glory. Not a single decoration, not a wreath on the door, not even a welcome mat. Just pure, unadulterated conformity. Tyler climbed out of the fort and came to stand beside me. "Is Mrs. Sinclair mad about our fort?" "Some people just don't understand fun," I told him, ruffling his dark hair. "Don't worry about it. Want some hot chocolate?" We headed inside, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that Brenda wasn't done with this. I had lived in Oakwood Hills for 5 years, ever since my divorce from Tyler's mom, and I had watched Brenda wage war against neighbors for offenses ranging from the wrong shade of mailbox to grass that was half an inch too tall. She didn't make idle threats. Sure enough, about 2 hours later, as Tyler and I were watching a movie and warming up, I heard the crunch of tires on snow outside. I looked out the window and felt my stomach drop. A Minneapolis police cruiser was parked in front of my house, and Brenda was standing on the sidewalk talking to an officer, gesturing wildly at my snow fort. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. "What's wrong, Dad?" Tyler asked, pausing the movie. "Nothing, stay here." I grabbed my coat and headed outside, trying to keep my anger in check. The officer was a tall guy, probably in his mid-30s, with a trimmed beard and an expression that suggested he was already regretting whatever call had brought him to my quiet street. Brenda was in full Karen mode, her voice carrying across the yard. "And as you can see, officer, it's clearly a safety hazard. What if it collapses on a child? What if someone walking by gets hurt? The homeowner has been completely unreasonable and refuses to comply with clearly stated community guidelines." The officer held up a hand, cutting off her tirade. "Madam, I understand your concerns. Let me just talk to the homeowner." He walked toward me, and I noticed his name tag read Officer Davidson. He had the weary look of someone who had dealt with one too many neighborhood disputes and would rather be literally anywhere else. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Officer Davidson. I got a call about a structure on your property that's allegedly violating local codes and HOA regulations." "It's a snow fort," I said flatly, "that I built with my 8-year-old son." Officer Davidson glanced at the fort, and I saw something flicker in his expression. He walked closer to it, examining the towers and walls with what looked like genuine interest. "Did you build this over the weekend?" "Saturday and Sunday, yeah. We've been planning it since the forecast called for heavy snow." He walked around the entire structure, and I noticed he had pulled out his phone. For a moment, I thought he was documenting evidence, but then I saw him taking photos from different angles, zooming in on specific details like the crenellations I had carved into the tower tops and the way we had reinforced the walls with ice. Brenda marched over, her boots crunching in the snow. "Officer, are you going to issue a citation or not?" Davidson held up a finger without looking at her. "Madam, please give me a moment." He took a few more photos, then turned to me. "How did you get the walls so smooth?" I blinked, caught off guard by the question. Spray bottle with water. Mist it and let it freeze. Creates a nice ice shell that holds everything together. Clever." He nodded appreciatively and took another photo. "And the drawbridge actually works." "Yeah, Tyler can pull it up and down from inside. It's just a sled on some rope, but he loves it." Officer Davidson smiled, and it completely transformed his face. "I've got 2 kids at home, 6 and 4. They've been begging me to build something like this, but I haven't had the time. This is impressive work." "Officer Davidson," Brenda interjected sharply, "I didn't call you here to admire the structure. It's in violation of multiple codes and needs to be removed immediately." Davidson turned to her, and his expression shifted back to professional neutrality. "Madam, I've reviewed the situation, and I don't see any violation of city codes here. This is a temporary snow structure on private property. It's not blocking the sidewalk, it's not obstructing the road, and it doesn't appear to pose any immediate safety hazards." "What about the HOA bylaws?" Brenda demanded, her voice rising again. "HOA regulations are a civil matter," Davidson explained patiently. "They're not enforced by the police department. If you have a dispute with a homeowner regarding HOA rules, you'll need to handle it through your association's internal procedures or civil court." Brenda's face went through several shades of red and purple. This is absolutely unacceptable. I was told that officers would enforce community standards. Whoever told you that was mistaken, Davidson said firmly. Unless there's an actual criminal violation or safety hazard, HOA disputes aren't police matters. He turned back to me and lowered his voice slightly. Would you mind if I got a few more shots? My kids would go crazy for something like this, and I'd love to try building it with them next weekend. I laughed, feeling the tension drain out of my shoulders. Go for it. Want me to show you how we did the support structure? That would be great, actually. I spent the next 10 minutes walking Officer Davidson through the construction process while Brenda stood there fuming. I explained how we had packed the base layers, how we had used cardboard boxes as temporary forms for the archways, and how the water spray technique created structural integrity that would last as long as the temperature stayed below freezing. Davidson took notes on his phone and asked intelligent questions about load bearing and stability. My oldest, Emma, she's really into building things. This would be perfect for her. Tyler's the same way, I said, warming up to the conversation. He's already planning additions. Wants to build a whole castle complex by the end of winter. Excuse me, Brenda interrupted icily. Are we finished here? Davidson straightened up and adopted his official tone again. Yes, madam. As I stated, there's no violation of city ordinances. If you wish to pursue this through your HOA, that's your prerogative, but it's not a police matter. Fine, she bit out. I'll be contacting the HOA board immediately, and Marcus, you can expect a formal letter of violation by end of business tomorrow. She stormed off toward her house, and Davidson watched her go with an expression that suggested he had dealt with her type many times before. Sorry you got dragged into this, I said. He shrugged. Part of the job. You'd be surprised how many calls we get about HOA disputes. Last month I had to respond to a complaint about someone's Christmas lights being the wrong color white. He shook his head. Anyway, thanks for the tips. Emma and Jake are going to love this. Good luck, I said, and if you need any advice while you're building, I'm usually around on weekends. I might take you up on that. He handed me a card with the non-emergency number for the precinct. If she keeps harassing you, give us a call and we can document it. Sometimes people like that need to understand what constitutes an actual emergency. After he left, I went back inside to find Tyler pressed against the window watching everything. Are we in trouble? Nope, I assured him. The police officer actually loved our fort. He's going to build one with his kids. Tyler's face lit up. Really? That's so cool. Yeah, it is. Now come on, we've got a movie to finish. But as we settled back on the couch, I couldn't fully relax. I knew Brenda, and I knew she wasn't going to let this go. The HOA board met every Tuesday evening, and tomorrow was Monday. I had about 24 hours before the hammer came down. The next morning, I was proven right. When I went out to my mailbox to grab the newspaper, there was already a letter taped to my front door. The envelope was marked urgent in red letters, and inside was a formal notice of violation printed on official Oakwood Hills HOA letterhead. The letter informed me that I was in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 regarding temporary structure height limitations, and Section 7, Paragraph 2 regarding unapproved modifications to property appearance. I was being fined $250, and I had 72 hours to remove the offending structure or face daily fines of $100 until compliance was achieved. The letter was signed by Brenda Sinclair in her capacity as HOA president and countersigned by 2 other board members I recognized from neighborhood events. Patricia Morrison, a retired accountant who lived 3 houses down, and Robert Chen, who worked in corporate finance and had the personality of a cardboard box. I took the letter inside and read it twice more, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. The language was deliberately aggressive, using terms like flagrant disregard for community standards and willful violation of established protocols. You would have thought I had erected a meth lab in my front yard instead of a snow fort. I called my buddy Derek, who was a lawyer, though not one who specialized in HOA law. He listened to my explanation and then laughed so hard I thought he might choke. "I'm sorry, man," he said when he caught his breath. "It's just, this is peak HOA insanity. Your kid's snow fort." "It's not funny, Derek. They're threatening daily fines." Okay. I heard papers rustling on his end. "Look, I don't do HOA stuff regularly, but I know a few things. First, check your HOA bylaws carefully. Sometimes these height restrictions have exceptions for temporary seasonal structures, especially ones that are clearly for children's recreation. Second, most HOA fines can't be enforced without going through a specific process. They have to give you notice, opportunity to be heard, all that. The letter says I have 72 hours. That's probably the hearing window. You have the right to contest this at a board meeting. When's their next one? Tomorrow night, I think. They meet every Tuesday. Perfect. Show up, bring pictures, make your case. And Marcus, bring your kid if you can. Nothing makes these petty tyrants look worse than threatening a child's fun." I wasn't sure about bringing Tyler into it, but Derek had a point. What are my actual legal options here? If they try to enforce the fines, you can dispute them. HOAs have power, but it's not unlimited. If their rules are unreasonable or if they're applying them inconsistently, you can challenge them. Worst case scenario, they could put a lien on your property for unpaid fines, but that's a long process and requires actual legal justification. "Great," I muttered. "Hey, don't stress too much. This is the kind of thing that makes HOAs look ridiculous. Document everything, be reasonable, and if they push it, we'll figure something out." After I hung up with Derek, I spent some time researching HOA law in Minnesota. What I found was a mixed bag. HOAs did have significant power to enforce their bylaws, but they also had to follow due process and couldn't be arbitrary or capricious in their enforcement. The problem was that fighting them often cost more in legal fees than just complying, which was exactly what people like Brenda counted on. That evening, I sat down with Tyler and explained the situation in terms he could understand. "Mrs. Sinclair is upset about our fort because she thinks it's too tall. But we worked so hard on it," Tyler said, his lower lip trembling. "I know, buddy. And we're not taking it down without a fight, but tomorrow night I have to go to a meeting and talk to some people about it. I might need you to come with me and explain why the fort is important to you. Would you be okay with that?" Tyler nodded seriously. "I can do that." Good man. Tuesday dragged by slowly. I worked from home, which was one of the perks of being a software developer, but I couldn't focus on code. I kept thinking about the meeting, about what I would say, about how Brenda would try to twist everything to make me look like the bad guy. At 6:30 that evening, Tyler and I walked into the Oakwood Hills Community Center, where the HOA board held their monthly meetings. The room was set up like a small courtroom, with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs for residents. About 15 people were scattered throughout the seats, most of them looking bored or annoyed at having to be there. Brenda sat in the center of the board table, flanked by Patricia and Robert. She looked entirely too pleased with herself, shuffling papers and whispering to the others. I found a seat near the front with Tyler beside me. A few neighbors gave me sympathetic looks. Old Mrs. Henderson, who lived at the end of our street, even reached over to pat my shoulder. Ridiculous, she whispered. My grandkids loved seeing that fort when they visited. The meeting started promptly at 7. Brenda called it to order with a sharp rap of a gavel that seemed entirely too dramatic for a suburban HOA meeting. Good evening, everyone. We have several items on tonight's agenda, but I want to address a pressing matter first. She looked directly at me. We have a homeowner who is currently in flagrant violation of multiple community guidelines, and despite being issued a formal notice, the violation has not been remedied. I got the letter yesterday, I said loudly. It's been less than 24 hours. You were given 72 hours to comply, Brenda shot back. The clock started when the violation began, which was Saturday. That's not what the letter said. It said I had 72 hours from the date of notice. Robert Chen leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. The letter states that you have 72 hours to remove the structure. The notice period began upon first observation of the violation. That's not how notice works, I argued. You can't retroactively start a compliance clock. The HOA bylaws clearly state that all temporary structures require advance approval, Patricia Morrison chimed in, her thin voice carrying across the room. You built this fort without seeking permission. It's snow, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. My son and I built a snow fort. We used snow that fell on my property to create something that will melt away naturally in a couple of weeks. That's irrelevant, Brenda declared. The bylaws don't distinguish between permanent and temporary materials. A structure is a structure. Tyler tugged on my sleeve. Dad, can I say something? I looked at Brenda. Can my son address the board? She looked irritated but nodded curtly. Make it brief. Tyler stood up and I saw his hands shaking slightly. He was nervous but determined. My name is Tyler O'Brien. I'm 8 years old. My dad and I built the fort together because I love castles and knights. We worked really hard on it for 2 whole days. It's the best thing we ever made together, and all my friends think it's cool. I don't understand why building something fun in the snow is bad. Several people in the audience murmured in agreement. I saw Mrs. Henderson nodding vigorously. Brenda's expression softened for maybe half a second before hardening again. That's very nice, young man, but rules are rules. They apply to everyone equally. Do they, though? I asked, standing up. Because I took a walk around the neighborhood yesterday afternoon, and I counted at least 6 violations of HOA bylaws that don't seem to bother you at all. Mike Patterson has a basketball hoop in his driveway that's been there for 2 years. Section 9, Paragraph 3 says those require approval. The Johnsons have a garden gnome that's over 12 inches tall, violating the lawn ornament size restriction. And your own house, Brenda, has a satellite dish mounted on the roof instead of the side of the house, which Section 15 specifically prohibits. The murmuring in the audience got louder. Brenda's face flushed. Those are completely different situations. How? Either we enforce the rules consistently, or we acknowledge that some of them are ridiculous and need to be revised. The board exercises discretion in enforcement, Robert said smoothly. We focus on violations that impact property values and community aesthetics. A kid's snow fort impacts property values, I asked incredulously. More than a satellite dish in direct violation of the rules. The satellite dish is barely visible from the street, Brenda snapped. And the snow fort is temporary and seasonal. Come on, this is insane and you all know it. A man I didn't recognize raised his hand. I'd like to speak if that's allowed. Brenda looked like she wanted to refuse but couldn't without looking petty. Go ahead, but keep it relevant. I'm Tom Wilson. I live over on Maple Court. I've been to 3 of these meetings in the past year, and every single time, It's been about Mrs. Sinclair trying to find someone for something minor while actual problems in the neighborhood get ignored. We've had the same broken streetlight on our corner for 6 months. There's a pothole on Birch Lane that's been growing since September. But sure, let's waste time on a snow fort. Street maintenance is the city's responsibility, not the HOA's, Patricia said primly. Then what exactly are we paying HOA dues for? Tom shot back. The meeting was starting to get away from Brenda, and I could see the panic creeping into her eyes. She banged the gavel again. We're getting off topic. The matter at hand is Marcus O'Brien's violation of clearly stated height restrictions for temporary structures. The board's position is that the structure must be removed within the 72-hour window, or fines will be assessed. I'm not removing it, I said firmly, and I'm formally disputing this violation. The rule is unreasonable as applied, it's being enforced inconsistently, and it serves no legitimate purpose in this instance. Then you'll be fined $100 per day starting Friday morning, Brenda declared. This is ridiculous, Mrs. Henderson called out. I move that we table this violation and review the temporary structure policy for reasonableness. I second that, Tom Wilson said immediately. Brenda looked flustered. That's not how this works. You can't just motion to table a violation. Actually, we can, Mrs. Henderson said. She might have been 75 years old, but her voice was sharp as a knife. I've been a member of this HOA for 23 years, longer than you've lived in this neighborhood, Brenda. Homeowners have the right to motion for policy review, and board members have to vote on it. She's right, Robert said reluctantly, leafing through a thick binder. Bylaws, Article 3, Section 8. Any homeowner can motion for policy review and it requires a board vote. Brenda shot him a murderous glare but had no choice. Fine. All in favor of tabling the violation and reviewing the temporary structure policy. Mrs. Henderson, Tom Wilson, and about 8 other people raised their hands. It wasn't a board vote, but the show of community support was clear. This is a board vote, not a community vote, Brenda said icily. Patricia, Robert, Patricia hesitated, looking at the raised hands around the room, then at Brenda. I think perhaps we should review the policy. It's been on the books for over a decade without revision. Patricia, Brenda hissed. I vote to table the violation pending policy review, Patricia said, her voice small but firm. Robert sighed. I also vote to table it. This has become too contentious, and we should make sure our policies are clear and reasonable before assessing fines. Brenda looked like she had been slapped. You can't be serious. 2-1, the motion passes, Robert said, making a note. The violation is tabled pending policy review, which will be added to next month's agenda. I felt Tyler grab my hand and squeeze it. Did we win, Dad? For now, buddy. For now. The meeting continued with other mundane business, but I barely paid attention. When it finally ended, several neighbors came up to shake my hand and tell me they were glad someone was finally standing up to Brenda's tyranny. Mrs. Henderson was particularly emphatic. That woman has been a nightmare since she got elected. My late husband would have put her in her place years ago. As Tyler and I walked out to the parking lot, I noticed Brenda getting into her car, her movements jerky and angry. She glared at me before slamming her door and peeling out with more aggression than necessary. You think she's going to keep trying to make us take down the fort? Tyler asked. Probably, I admitted, but we bought ourselves some time. And who knows, maybe the board will actually change the policy. That would be good. We drove home in comfortable silence, and I felt cautiously optimistic. I had expected the meeting to be a disaster, but community support had turned the tide. Maybe Brenda wasn't as powerful as she thought she was. That optimism lasted exactly 2 days. Thursday afternoon. I was working on a particularly nasty piece of code when I heard a truck pull up outside. I glanced out the window and saw a commercial vehicle with Oakwood Property Services emblazoned on the side. Two men got out and started walking toward my front yard. I rushed outside. "Can I help you?" The older of the two men, wearing a thick winter coat and work gloves, consulted a clipboard. "We're here to remove an unauthorized structure at this address. Work order from the Oakwood Hills HOA." "What? No, there's no work order. The violation was tabled at the board meeting." He frowned and showed me the clipboard. Sure enough, there was an official-looking work order, dated today, signed by Brenda Sinclair as HOA president. "Says here we're authorized to remove the snow structure in the front yard and bill the homeowner for services rendered." This is insane. I'm telling you, this was tabled. She doesn't have authority to do this. The younger worker shifted uncomfortably. "Look, man, we just do what the work orders say. If you have a dispute with the HOA, you need to take it up with them." "I'm taking it up with you right now. Don't touch that fort." "Sir, if you interfere with authorized HOA maintenance, we can call the police." "Call them," I said. "Go ahead. Because this isn't authorized, and if you destroy my property, that's vandalism." The older worker pulled out his phone and stepped away to make a call. I could hear him talking to someone, explaining the situation. After a minute, he came back. "Boss says to hold off until we get confirmation from the HOA president." Smart boss. They retreated to their truck to wait, and I immediately called Derek. "Brenda just sent a property service company to tear down the fort. She issued a fake work order after the violation was tabled." "She what?" Derek sounded genuinely shocked. "Marcus, that might actually be illegal. If the board voted to table the violation, she doesn't have unilateral authority to order remediation. That could be fraud, abuse of authority, all kinds of things." "What do I do?" "Document everything. Take pictures of the work order if you can. I'm going to make some calls." I approached the truck again. "Can I get a photo of that work order?" The older worker hesitated, then shrugged. "I guess. Just don't put us on blast on social media or something. We're just trying to do our job." I snapped several photos of the work order, making sure to capture Brenda's signature and the date. Then I texted them to Derek and waited. Tyler got home from school about 20 minutes into the standoff. He got off the bus and saw the truck, and his face fell. "Are they going to destroy our fort?" "Not if I have anything to say about it." We went inside, but Tyler kept watching out the window, anxious. I felt terrible that this stupid HOA drama was affecting him, but I wasn't about to back down now. About an hour later, a police cruiser pulled up. I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was that Officer Davidson stepped out. He recognized me immediately and walked over with a bemused expression. "Mr. O'Brien, we really need to stop meeting like this. Tell me about it. Let me guess, Brenda called you." "Actually, the property service company called, said there was a dispute about authorized work." He glanced at the fort, which still stood in all its glory. "I see the fort survived. The board voted to table the violation at Tuesday's meeting. Brenda issued this work order anyway." I showed him the photos on my phone. Davidson studied them, his expression growing serious. "You have documentation of the board vote. Meeting minutes should be posted on the HOA website within 48 hours. It's in the bylaws." He pulled out his phone and spent a few minutes looking something up. "Interesting. The minutes were posted this morning, and they don't mention anything about your violation or the vote to table it." "What?" I grabbed my own phone and navigated to the HOA website. Sure enough, the minutes from Tuesday's meeting had been posted, but the entire section about my snow fort had been omitted. It jumped straight from the approval of last month's minutes to a discussion about holiday decoration guidelines. "This is fraud," I said. There were at least 20 people at that meeting who heard the vote. Officer Davidson rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "This is getting complicated. The property service guys are claiming they have a valid work order. You're claiming the HOA president issued it without proper authority. Without clear documentation of the board vote, it's a he said, she said situation. Can you call some of the people who were at the meeting? Mrs. Henderson lives right down the street. Tom Wilson, Patricia Morrison." "I can't just start calling residents without cause," Davidson said. "But what I can do is advise the property service company that there's a significant dispute about the authorization of this work order, and they should hold off until it's resolved." He walked over to the truck and had a long conversation with the two workers. I saw a lot of heads shaking and gesturing, but eventually they started up the truck and drove away. Davidson came back to where I was standing. "They're going to contact their boss and the HOA to sort this out. I strongly advise them not to proceed until there's clear documentation of proper authorization." "Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I'm going to be straight with you. This HOA president seems to have a real problem with you, and she's escalating in ways that are concerning. If she's falsifying meeting minutes or abusing her authority, that's potentially criminal. But it's also a civil matter that's going to require lawyers and probably a lot of time and money to sort out. I know. I'm just trying to protect something my son and I built together." Davidson glanced at the house, where Tyler's face was visible in the window. "I get it. My kids loved the fort I built with them last weekend, by the way. Used your techniques. Came out great. Despite everything," I smiled. "Glad to hear it. Look, my advice is to document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every email. If she keeps pushing this, you're going to need evidence of a pattern of harassment. And talk to a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes. They're a specific breed." After Davidson left, I sat down and started compiling documentation. I wrote up a detailed account of Tuesday's meeting, including the names of everyone who had spoken in support of tabling the violation. I took screenshots of the posted minutes with their suspicious omissions. I saved all the photos of the work order. Then I called Patricia Morrison directly. She answered on the third ring, sounding harassed. "Hello, Patricia, this is Marcus O'Brien. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to ask about Tuesday's meeting." There was a long pause. "Marcus, I can't really talk about ongoing HOA matters. The meeting minutes don't include the vote to table my violation. You were there, you voted to table it." Another pause, even longer. "I know. Did Brenda tell you to omit it from the minutes? I shouldn't be talking about this." Her voice was strained. "Patricia, she sent a property service company to my house today with a fraudulent work order. This is serious." I heard her take a shaky breath. "Brenda told Robert and me that the vote didn't count because it wasn't properly motioned according to parliamentary procedure. She said we had to proceed with the violation as originally planned. That's not what happened. Mrs. Henderson made a proper motion, Tom Wilson seconded it, and you and Robert voted for it. That's textbook parliamentary procedure." "I know, but Brenda said we had to follow her interpretation as board president. Marcus, I'm sorry, but I can't go against her. She controls everything in this HOA, and if I make her angry, she'll make my life hell. She's already making my life hell, Patricia. And if she's abusing her authority and falsifying records, that's illegal." "I can't help you," Patricia said, and her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, I really am, but I just can't." She hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in frustration. Derek called back an hour later with news. "Okay, I've been doing research and making calls. What Brenda is doing is potentially several kinds of illegal. Falsifying HOA meeting minutes could be fraud. Issuing unauthorized work orders and attempting to bill you for them could be theft by deception. Abusing her authority as board president for personal vendettas could be breach of fiduciary duty. So what do I do? First, you need to gather testimony from people who were at that meeting. Get them to make written statements about what happened and what was voted on. Second, you need to file a formal complaint with the HOA board, copying all homeowners. Make this public. And if that doesn't work, then we lawyer up and go after her. But Marcus, I have to warn you, this could get expensive and ugly. HOA litigation is a nightmare. It might be easier to just take down the fort and move on. I looked out the window at Tyler, who was bundled up in his coat, adding details to one of the towers with a small shovel. I'm not taking it down, Derek. This isn't about the fort anymore. It's about Brenda thinking she can bully people and break rules whenever she feels like it. I was hoping you'd say that, Derek said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. All right, let's do this properly. I'll draft a formal complaint and notice of potential legal action. In the meantime, start collecting those statements. I spent the rest of the evening reaching out to neighbors. Mrs. Henderson was eager to help and wrote a detailed statement about the meeting, including her motion to table the violation. Tom Wilson did the same. I got statements from 4 other homeowners who had been present. Robert Chen refused to respond to my calls or emails, which I expected. But the statements I did get were thorough and consistent. Friday morning, Derek sent me the drafted complaint. It was 6 pages long and brutally formal, detailing every violation of HOA procedures that Brenda had committed, citing specific bylaws and Minnesota statutes about HOA governance. It demanded that the violation be officially tabled as voted, that the minutes be corrected, that any fines be rescinded, and that Brenda issue a formal apology. It also included a paragraph noting that if these demands weren't met within 7 business days, I would be filing a lawsuit against both Brenda personally and the HOA for harassment, fraud, and abuse of authority. Derek helped me send it via certified mail to Brenda, Robert, and Patricia, and also posted it publicly on the HOA community forum that residents could access online. The response was immediate and explosive. By Friday evening, the forum was flooded with comments. It turned out I wasn't the only person Brenda had targeted with aggressive enforcement. People shared stories about ridiculous fines, threatening letters, and selective rule enforcement. One family had been fined $500 because their teenager's car was an unapproved color, even though there was no rule about car colors in the bylaws. Another homeowner had been cited for having wind chimes that were allegedly too loud, despite the fact that Brenda herself had wind chimes on her porch. The forum thread grew to over 300 comments in less than 24 hours. People were angry, and they were organizing. Saturday afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Mrs. Henderson, Tom Wilson, and about 15 other neighbors standing on my porch. "We're calling an emergency homeowner meeting," Mrs. Henderson announced. According to the bylaws, if 20% of homeowners petition for one, the board has to hold it within 2 weeks. "We've got signatures from 38 households," Tom added, holding up a clipboard. "That's 42% of the neighborhood." I felt a surge of hope. "What are you trying to accomplish?" "We're moving to remove Brenda from the board and elect a new president," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "She's abused her authority for the last time." The emergency meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at the community center. The week leading up to it was tense. Brenda sent out a mass email to all homeowners, claiming that a small group of malcontents was trying to undermine the HOA's authority and damage property values. She framed herself as the victim, saying she was just trying to maintain community standards in the face of hostile opposition. It didn't work. If anything, her defensive, self-righteous tone made people angrier. On Saturday, the community center was packed. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. The turnout was unprecedented. Even the board members looked shocked. Mrs. Henderson had been elected to moderate the meeting, and she called it to order with far more authority than Brenda had ever managed. This emergency meeting has been called to address serious concerns about board governance and the conduct of our HOA president. We have several motions to consider, but first, I want to give Brenda Sinclair an opportunity to respond to the allegations that have been raised. Brenda stood up, her face pale but her jaw set stubbornly. This entire meeting is a witch hunt orchestrated by Marcus O'Brien because he's upset about being held accountable for violating HOA rules. Actually, I said, standing up, this meeting was organized by Mrs. Henderson and signed by over 40% of homeowners. I had nothing to do with it. You started this with your ridiculous snow fort. No, you started this by calling the police over a harmless snow fort and then falsifying meeting minutes when the board voted against you. The room erupted in murmurs. Brenda's face turned red. I did no such thing. Mrs. Henderson banged a gavel. Order, please. Brenda, we have sworn statements from 7 homeowners who were present at Tuesday's meeting. They all confirmed that a motion was made to table Marcus's violation, and that Patricia Morrison and Robert Chen voted in favor of that motion. The meeting minutes you posted omit this entirely. How do you explain that? The motion was not properly made according to parliamentary procedure, Brenda insisted. I've been on parliamentary committees for 50 years, Mrs. Henderson said coldly. The motion was perfectly proper. You simply didn't like the result. This is absurd. I've done nothing wrong. I've been trying to maintain property values and community standards while being attacked by ungrateful neighbors who don't appreciate the work I do. The work you do. Tom Wilson stood up, his voice angry. You mean like fining people for made-up violations while ignoring actual problems? Like the time you cited my daughter's car as an unapproved color even though there's no such rule. Or when you threatened to fine me for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours, even though the garbage truck comes at unpredictable times. Another homeowner called out. More voices joined in, people standing up to share their own stories of Brenda's overreach and pettiness. The room became a chorus of frustration and anger, years of resentment boiling over. Brenda tried to shout over them. You're all being ridiculous. If you don't like the rules, move to a neighborhood without an HOA. We like the rules just fine, Mrs. Henderson said sharply. We don't like you abusing your authority and treating your neighbors like criminals for minor or non-existent infractions. I move that we vote to remove Brenda Sinclair from the HOA board effective immediately, Tom Wilson announced. I second that motion, someone called out. Mrs. Henderson nodded. All in favor, a forest of hands went up. I did a quick count and estimated at least 70% of the room was voting yes. All opposed. Brenda's hand shot up, along with maybe 5 or 6 others. The motion passes by overwhelming majority. Brenda Sinclair is removed from the HOA board effective immediately. Brenda looked stunned, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. You're all going to regret this. Property values are going to plummet and it'll be your own fault. She slammed the door behind her and the room erupted in applause. The meeting continued for another hour as we elected a new board president. Mrs. Henderson was nominated and accepted, with Tom Wilson as vice president and a woman named Jennifer Park, who was an attorney, as secretary. One of the first motions under the new leadership was to formally rescind my violation and any associated fines. It passed unanimously. The second motion was to establish a committee to review all HOA bylaws for reasonableness and clarity, with the goal of eliminating outdated or overly restrictive rules. That also passed unanimously. As the meeting wrapped up, dozens of neighbors came over to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to Brenda. It was overwhelming and humbling. Officer Davidson showed up as people were filing out. He'd been standing in the back, apparently curious about the outcome. "Just wanted to make sure everything stayed peaceful," he said when I approached him. "Sounds like it worked out well. Thanks in large part to you taking pictures instead of threatening me with citations," I said. He grinned. "Just doing my job. Speaking of which, Emma asked me to give you this." He handed me a folded piece of construction paper. I opened it to find a crayon drawing of a snow fort with 2 stick figures standing beside it. "Thank you for helping my dad build our fort," was written across the top in careful child handwriting. "That's incredibly sweet," I said, genuinely touched. "She's been talking about it nonstop. We've already started planning an addition for next weekend." Tyler had been waiting near the door, and he came over when he saw me talking to Officer Davidson. "Did your kids like their fort?" "They loved it," Davidson assured him. "Best thing we built all winter." "Maybe we can have a fort building contest," Tyler suggested excitedly. Davidson laughed. "That's a great idea. I'll talk to Emma and Jake about it." As we drove home that evening, Tyler was buzzing with excitement. "Dad, we won, right? We get to keep the fort." "We get to keep it as long as the snow lasts," I confirmed. "And if we want to build another one next winter, we can." "This is the best day ever." I smiled, but I was thinking about all the documentation I still had about Brenda's actions. The falsified meeting minutes, the fraudulent work order, the statements from neighbors about her pattern of abuse. It was enough to potentially pursue legal action, and Derek had already said he'd be willing to help pro bono just because the case was interesting. But as I pulled into my driveway and saw the snow fort standing proudly in the yard, lights from the house making the ice shell sparkle, I decided to let it go. Brenda had been removed from power, the ridiculous violation had been rescinded, and the HOA was under new, reasonable leadership. Sometimes winning doesn't require destroying your opponent. Sometimes it's enough to just stand your ground and let the community decide what's right. Sunday morning, I was drinking coffee and watching Tyler play in the fort when I noticed a car pull up across the street. It was a silver sedan I didn't recognize, and a man in a suit got out carrying a briefcase. He walked up to Brenda's door and knocked. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see Brenda's body language through her front window. She was animated, gesturing wildly, clearly agitated. The man left after about 20 minutes, and I thought that was the end of it. But Monday afternoon, I got a phone call from Jennifer Park, the new HOA secretary. "Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Brenda has filed a lawsuit against you personally and against the HOA." My stomach dropped. For what? Defamation, harassment, and conspiracy to damage her reputation. She's claiming that you organized a campaign to remove her from the board based on false allegations. That's insane. I didn't organize anything, and none of the allegations were false. I know. We all know, but she's hired a lawyer and she's apparently serious about this. I called Derek immediately. He listened to the situation and then said something I didn't expect. "This might actually be good for us." "How is getting sued good?" "Because now everything comes out in discovery. If she wants to claim defamation, she has to prove that the statements made about her were false. which means we get to present all the evidence of her misconduct in a court of law, meeting minutes, work orders, sworn statements from homeowners, all of it. So we countersue. We file a motion to dismiss based on lack of merit, and we file a counterclaim for abuse of process and emotional distress. Marcus, if she pushes this, she's going to lose badly. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork and depositions. Brenda's lawyer seemed increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence piled up against his client. The falsified meeting minutes, the fraudulent work order, the testimony from multiple homeowners about selective enforcement and harassment. The breaking point came during Brenda's deposition. Derek questioned her extensively about her actions, and she became increasingly defensive and contradictory. At one point, when confronted with the work order she'd issued after the board vote, she claimed she had authority to override board decisions in emergency situations. And a snow fort constituted an emergency, Derek asked calmly. It was a safety hazard, Brenda insisted. Did you contact any safety inspector or engineer to assess this alleged hazard? I didn't need to. It was obviously dangerous. Based on what expertise? Common sense. Derek presented the photos Officer Davidson had taken of the fort, along with his written statement that he'd observed no safety hazards. He also presented statements from the property service company confirming that Brenda had issued the work order without board approval and had instructed them to bill me for services. By the end of the deposition, Brenda's lawyer was visibly sweating. 2 weeks later, Brenda dropped the lawsuit. Her lawyer filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning she couldn't refile the same claims. Derek immediately filed our counterclaim. The counterclaim alleged fraud, abuse of authority, harassment, and emotional distress. We weren't seeking huge damages, just enough to make a point and cover legal fees. Brenda's lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement, offering to pay my legal fees if I dropped the counterclaim. Derek advised me to consider it. She's been removed from the board, her lawsuit failed, and she's been publicly humiliated, he said. You've won in every way that matters. Taking it further is just going to be time and stress. What about accountability? I asked. She falsified official documents, Derek. She tried to commit fraud. Doesn't that deserve consequences? In a perfect world, yes. But the reality is that pursuing this through civil court is going to take months or years, and even if you win, you'll mostly just get money. She's already lost her position and her reputation. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to pursue it, to make sure Brenda faced real consequences for her actions. But another part of me was tired of the whole situation and just wanted it to be over. In the end, I agreed to a settlement. Brenda would pay $20,000, covering all my legal fees and compensating me for time and stress. She would also sign a statement acknowledging that she had exceeded her authority as HOA president, and that all allegations made against her regarding the snow fort incident were factually accurate. It wasn't a total victory, but it felt like justice. The snow fort lasted until mid-March, when a warm spell finally melted it away. Tyler was sad to see it go, but we'd already made plans to build an even bigger one next winter. The new HOA board under Mrs. Henderson's leadership was a revelation. They revised the bylaws to remove or clarify dozens of outdated or unreasonable rules. The height restriction on temporary structures was changed to exempt seasonal recreational structures like snow forts, Halloween decorations, and Christmas lights. They also established clear procedures for rule enforcement, requiring board votes for any fines over $50, and giving homeowners the right to appeal before payment was required. Property values didn't plummet, contrary to Brenda's dire predictions. If anything, The neighborhood became more pleasant as people relaxed and stopped living in fear of their HOA. Brenda and her husband put their house on the market in April and moved away by June. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that they'd moved to a condo in downtown Minneapolis, somewhere without an HOA at all. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The house was bought by a young couple with twin toddlers. When they moved in, Tyler immediately went over to introduce himself and show them where the snow fort had stood, promising to help build one with their kids next winter. Officer Davidson became a semi-regular presence in the neighborhood. His kids went to the same school as Tyler, and we'd occasionally cross paths at pickup time. He always asked about HOA drama, joking that our neighborhood had provided him with one of the most interesting calls of his career. Usually, HOA disputes are just sad, he told me once. Someone being petty about lawn height or fence color, but yours actually had a happy ending. The reasonable people won. It shouldn't have been that hard, though, I said. No, it shouldn't. But that's the thing about HOAs. They're only as good or bad as the people running them. You got lucky that your neighbors were willing to stand up when it mattered. He was right. Without Mrs. Henderson organizing the emergency meeting, without Tom Wilson and the others speaking up, without the overwhelming community support, Brenda might have gotten away with all of it. The snow fort would have been destroyed. I'd have been stuck with unfair fines, and she'd have continued her petty tyranny for years. That summer, the neighborhood threw a block party, something that hadn't happened in years because Brenda had always found reasons to block it. The new board approved it enthusiastically, and even used some HOA funds to rent a bouncy castle and hire a food truck. Tyler played with Officer Davidson's kids and dozens of other neighborhood children, all of them running around and being loud and joyful without fear of complaints or citations. Parents mingled and laughed, sharing stories about Brenda's regime and celebrating the new, saner leadership. Mrs. Henderson gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their participation in transforming the HOA into something that actually served the community instead of terrorizing it. "We're not here to make everyone's life harder," she said. "We're here to maintain our shared spaces and help each other. That's what a homeowners association should be." Everyone applauded, and I saw more than a few people wiping their eyes. As the sun set and the party wound down, I found myself sitting on my front porch with Tyler, watching the last few kids chase each other around the street. "Dad," Tyler said thoughtfully, "are you glad we built the fort? More than you know, buddy. Even with all the trouble." Especially because of the trouble. Sometimes standing up for something small teaches you that you can stand up for bigger things too. He thought about that for a moment, then nodded seriously. "Next winter, we should build 2 forts, one for us and one for Officer Davidson's kids." "That's a great idea. Or maybe we could build one giant fort that everyone can use." I smiled and put my arm around his shoulders. "Now you're thinking big." The following winter, that's exactly what we did, with Mrs. Henderson's approval and the new board's enthusiastic support. We organized a neighborhood snow fort building day. Over 30 people showed up, kids and adults alike, and we constructed an enormous fortress that sprawled across the community center's lawn. It had multiple towers, a maze of corridors, a central courtyard, and even a slide built into one wall. Tyler and Officer Davidson's daughter, Emma, co-designed it, their crayon sketches turned into reality through collective effort. The fort became a neighborhood gathering place for the rest of the winter. Kids played in it after school, parents took pictures, and even some teenagers started using it for elaborate capture-the-flag games. Someone started a neighborhood social media page dedicated to documenting the fort's evolution, as people added new features and decorations. It became a source of community pride, something unique that belonged to everyone. A local news station got wind of it and sent a reporter out to do a story. They interviewed Tyler and me, along with Mrs. Henderson and Officer Davidson. This started with one dad building a fort with his son, the reporter said into the camera. And it turned into a battle against HOA overreach that transformed an entire neighborhood. Now, that same fort has become a symbol of community cooperation and the power of standing up for what's right. It was cheesy, but it was also kind of true. The story aired on the evening news, and suddenly, we were getting calls and emails from people across the country dealing with their own HOA nightmares. They wanted advice, support, stories of hope that they could push back against unreasonable boards and win. Derek started getting inquiries about HOA representation from people in other states. Mrs. Henderson became a local expert on HOA reform, invited to speak at community organization meetings around the Twin Cities. As for me, I just went back to my normal life. Writing code, raising Tyler, and being an active part of a neighborhood that had learned to govern itself with common sense and kindness, instead of fear and pettiness. Brenda became a cautionary tale, the name invoked whenever someone on the new board suggested a rule that seemed overly restrictive or punitive. "Let's not pull a Brenda" became a common refrain, shorthand for "let's make sure we're being reasonable." Years later, when Tyler was in middle school, he had to do a project about a time when he stood up for something he believed in. He chose the snow fort incident, creating a presentation that included photos of the fort, copies of the HOA documents, and interviews with neighbors about how it changed the community. I helped him prepare, and as we went through all the old materials, I was struck by how significant that moment had been. A simple snow fort had exposed corruption, united a neighborhood, and taught both of us that you don't have to accept injustice just because it comes with an official letterhead. Tyler's teacher was so impressed with the project that she invited him to present it at a school assembly. He stood in front of 200 students and told the story of how his snow fort took down a tyrannical HOA president. The kids loved it. The administrators were a bit more conflicted, not sure how to feel about a story that essentially celebrated defying authority. But they couldn't deny the lesson at its core, that rules should serve people, not the other way around, and that communities thrive when individuals have the courage to speak up. After the assembly, Tyler came home energized and thoughtful. "Dad, do you think we made a difference?" "I know we did," I said. "Not just for us, but for everyone in the neighborhood, and maybe for people we'll never meet who heard the story and realized they could stand up for themselves too." "That's pretty cool." "Yeah, it is. We never built another individual snow fort after that first one. The community fort became our tradition, something we worked on together with neighbors every winter. It grew more elaborate each year, incorporating new ideas and features that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with snow and ice. Officer Davidson's kids became regular collaborators with Tyler, the three of them sketching designs and debating structural integrity like tiny architects. Emma turned out to have a gift for engineering, her designs always the most stable and creative. Mrs. Henderson served as HOA president for 5 years before retiring and passing the role to Tom Wilson. Under their leadership, Oakwood Hills became known as one of the most livable, friendly neighborhoods in Minneapolis. People actually wanted to move there, not because of strict enforcement and uniform conformity, but because of the sense of community and the reasonable, transparent governance. The old fear and resentment that had characterized the Brenda era faded into memory, replaced by block parties, neighborhood watches that actually helped instead of spied, and an HOA board that saw themselves as servants of the community rather than rulers of it. I stayed involved with the HOA as a regular member, attending meetings and volunteering for committees. I wanted to make sure we never slid back into the bad old days, that the lessons we'd learned remained part of our community culture. And every winter when the first snow fell, Tyler and I would stand in the front yard and remember that first fort. The one that started as a simple father-son project and became a catalyst for change. "Ready to start planning this year's design?" I'd ask. "Always," Tyler would reply. And we'd pull out the graph paper and colored pencils, dreaming of towers and walls and slides, knowing that what we were really building was so much more than frozen water. We were building community, connection, and the kind of childhood memories that last forever. The story of the snow fort and the HOA became part of neighborhood lore, passed down to new residents as both warning and inspiration. It reminded people that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. And sometimes, the most important battles are fought not with weapons or lawsuits or grand gestures, but with simple acts of creation. Building something beautiful, sharing it with others, and refusing to let small-minded people tear it down. That's what Tyler and I did that winter day when we piled snow into towers and walls. We didn't know we were starting a revolution. We just knew we were making something special together. And in the end, that's exactly what mattered most.